Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending this late session here on the first day of the, Fedora 38 release party. Congratulations to all of Fedora on the 38th release of our flagship operating system. I was just thinking that I have been here since Fedora Core 4. I've been involved in all of those releases, so that's a lot of Fedoras that I've had my hands in. So this presentation, as Justin was saying, is about Fedora's adoption of SPDX license expressions. And that sounds like super technical and boring. So let's get off this slide and go, forward a bit. So first off, who are we? Well, I'm David Cantrell. I'm in software engineering. I'm also on FESCO and a Fedora council member. My interest in this project has been from the sort of technical side and implementation side. Like, how do we make it easier for software developers to represent licensing, figure out licensing, and keep it accurate? We have Jelaine Lovejoy. Well, I'll turn it over to you, Jelaine. You introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jelaine. I am part of Red Hat Legal. I'm on the product team, and I also have been involved in sort of open source legal issues, most notably the SPX project since, I don't know, a long time now, I guess 2010. And so I lead the SPX legal team. I've been one of the SPX license list maintainers since its inception and have had a long sort of ongoing conversation with Richard about what we are now realizing, which is sort of Fedora adopting SPX IDs. And I would say that the Fedora good list, as it used to be called, was very influential in the early days of creating the SPX license list. So it's kind of feel like we've come for full circle.
And we have Richard Fontana also on the call. Richard?
So I'm Richard Fontana. I'm also a lawyer in Red Hat Legal. I have been doing Fedora-related work for actually a very long time now. I even started before I was at Red Hat, which is kind of a long story, but mostly during my time at Red Hat, I spent a long time working with Tom Calloway. In the old days, advising on Fedora legal issues and the pre-SPDX system we had for classifying and approving licenses. So it's always been a big part of my work here.
Thank you. And Jelaine, I just realized I have pulled up the slides for the July presentation, which is the more generic one. I am having a day. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to go for it because this information is useful.
Just unshare and then you, whatever. Oh, then you won't be able to see. Well, yeah. So why don't you unshare and fix it, and I will do the next slide because.
Thank you.
Yeah, we don't need to see the next slide. It's just text.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So the next slide that David is going to unshare, and you might want to unshare first and pull up the right slide deck. We've done a few iterations of this presentation. Is what is SPX? So I guess since we do have we have a chat. I don't know how many people have heard of SPDX. I guess good to put a yes or no in the chat. So excellent. Oh, yay, yeses. So just as a background, and for anyone who says no or doesn't want a minute or whatever, the SPX project's an open standard for communicating information about software. It's been around, like I mentioned, since about 2010. I think of it as like kind of like a language for communicating software information. And when it began, if you think about historically the time frame, then it was really more focused on sort of facilitating license compliance. Obviously, over the years, it's evolved to a lot of other needs and use cases that are sort of go along with communicating information about software. In 2021, it became an ISO standard. As some people may be aware, now we're in an era where SBOMs are the hot topic because of some US government requirements. And SPX 3.0, which is sort of in the works right now, is a big change. If any of you are familiar with the spec itself, to become more sort of modular to accommodate those different use cases. But the part that we are most interested in for the purpose of this talk is the SPX license list, which is, you know, a part of the SPX project. And I always like to say it's not really just a list, because when people go to the website, they kind of just see a list. That's a very visual thing. We all know what a list is, but it is a bigger sort of incorporates other things that make the list meaningful, which includes the matching guidelines, which is sort of how you rely on those license IDs for each license to know what that means. There's also license expression syntax. That's actually lives in the spec. So that's, you know, how you articulate more complex license scenarios, like if you have more than one license apply or you have a choice of licenses. Yeah, and then a little piece of history. The SPX legal team reviewed the Fedora Good licenses in 2014 and added about 80 licenses. The license list back then, that was kind of hoping that, you know, Fedora would adopt SPX IDs. It was also just to kind of grow the list to be more useful for everyone. And as of the last release, SPX added about 40 licenses. Most of them were due to Fedora adopting the SPX IDs. Obviously, a lot of those licenses exist in other repos. And so I think Fedora has been sort of probably the most influential on sort of contributing to the expansion of the SPX license list, which, like I said, I think more people benefit from than just Fedora. Do you want to go back to the slides? David, was that enough time?
Yeah, sorry, I was just getting that set up here. So you just did number 3 there.
Yep.
This thing is really it is not wanting to cooperate with me. So hang on just a sec. I've got them up, so I'll share them again here.
Yeah, so we're on slide 4.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So why are we doing this? All right. So why are we doing this? Again, I said my interest in this has been from the sort of engineering, the technical side. I got involved in it working on some sort of analysis tools for built packages, and one of the things it would do is check licenses. And I found out that the data that we had that Jolene was just talking about on the website, both Fedora Wiki, and then we have other licensing resources that are online now. None of that was in a format readable by software, and no one was really in charge of getting it from sort of that published form into something a computer could use. And to make matters worse, I found out that what copies of that data we did have were more than one, and everyone had just sort of taken a snapshot at various points in time. So again, changes for Fedora. The license matters. Like this is first and foremost for open source software. As an author myself, you know, the license of that I put in my work matters to me, and we should respect that. With SPX now, we have an opportunity to work in this standards defined sort of way to represent and express licensing information. We don't have to maintain the system that we had come up with that served us well for a long time. And really had a lot of people working on it, but there wasn't really a clear owner. But probably most importantly is that the standard now that exists as SPDX ties into the SBOM sort of stuff, the software bill of materials, which is a thing you might hear thrown around, you know, from time to time. This is getting important for critical systems, for you know, users of software want to know where things originate from, and to make sense of that data, you need like standard ways of representing it. So again, we already had a system. A lot of people understood our system. It was defined really well, but as I mentioned already, there was no clear owner. We didn't have really consistent documentation for package maintainers. So you had people that would infer things that they would need to do. Some would go above and beyond. Others would do bare minimal. Everyone had good intentions, but again, it wasn't consistent. So the new system we have, we want to clarify all of that and try to make the system as easy for package maintainers as possible. So with that, what did we do? Well, here's the four main things. First is documentation. Jelaine and Richard did a great job putting together the Fedora legal resources part on docs.fedoraproject.org. You should start there. It talks about what we need to put in our packages and like how to express all this information and what to do when you encounter a new license or maybe a confusing question or something like that, or you have a question about something you see that's not very clear. That leads to the next thing, Fedora license data. This is a project on GitLab in the Fedora space, and this is where you can ask questions about those licensing issues that you encounter. You say, well, I think it's this, but that doesn't really match the text here. I'm not quite sure what to do. The issues there will be read, and then we'll have like a clear answer on what to do next. Maybe it is like a license we already know about, or maybe it's something that we need to record in a different way. Migration to SPDX expressions. This is a thing that went through as a Fedora change proposal, and it is a long project because we have a lot of packages in Fedora, but we're using this opportunity to do an audit of packages as well and helping maintainers go through. And, if the package says MIT and BSD in the old Fedora notation, that might not be true anymore. So the new SPDX expression may be a bit more complicated and a bit more detailed, but we don't really know because it's on a package by package basis. And then lastly, contributions to SPDX. All of this work that we've been doing, we've been able to give back to spdx.org, and they seem to be quite receptive to that right now, which is good. So again, Fedora participating in an upstream that we depend on, and we get to help each other out. So that's it. Well, of course, getting through all that was just the easy part. So 2 objectives here for our revised policy. Review the licenses encountered. Okay, so we have all of the source code that goes together to produce a binary RPM. We need to collect all the licenses and put that in the license expression. This is easier said than done, and unfortunately, it's not something that can be really mechanized. We gotta do some hard work here. Now we do have tools that help with this, that kind of put us on the right path, but they really aren't a replacement for really getting in there and doing the work yourself. So we're trying to help maintainers understand that and really sort of know that this is kind of an ongoing thing. Certainly complicated projects will introduce code from time to time that might come from another project, and that introduces a new license. And this is the kind of stuff that we do need to capture because, like I said, part of complying with an industry standard is making sure our data is accurate. So represent an enumeration of all licenses for code and other material in the binary RPMs. Okay, so this is
Dave, you want to let Richard cover this one?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh, sure.
A roll a bit.
Yeah. Let's see. So we have 2 objectives here, but I forget what the second objective was. But I think so I think it's about sort of representation and also just the process of approval itself. So we want the license field in the spec file to represent what we describe as an enumeration of all licenses for code and other, even non-code content that is contained in a given binary RPM. Now, we don't see that as creating a new rule or a new policy. That's a clarification of what we kind of understood the old policy to be. That, first of all, license tags are about binary RPM, so it's not everything you find in the source RPM or the source tarball, but it's what's actually in the installed binary RPM. And simple enumeration means, if you find a license on something that is reflected in or included in the binary RPM, that should go in the license expression. So don't do any further analysis. And one of the reasons for that is that there isn't any kind of universal agreement on what sort of further analysis you could possibly do. So some people might think, well, you can simplify expressions. You can kind of algebraically reduce them to a simpler format, applying certain, what I would describe as kind of folkloric rules about GPL interpretation and so forth. But the truth is that there isn't, I mean, the way that was sometimes done by some package maintainers in the past was very inconsistent from package maintainer to package maintainer. So we want to have a consistent approach to this. And simple enumeration means, we don't, if you find a given license and it's in the binary RPM, you don't have to repeat it multiple times if you're finding it in different parts of what goes into the binary RPM. So this is seen. So yeah. So we see this as a continuation of the old policy, but just making use of a new representation format in the form of SPDX expressions. And I think the other objective is sort of using SPDX to help us classify what licenses are allowed and what aren't. So we previously had a system that was not quite as good, I would say, as SPDX is in sort of making clear, what are the set of licenses that we are approving in a certain act of approval. So, when we say that MIT is approved, we mean something highly specific. It is defined by the SPDX project. It is sort of a set of permutations within a certain set of boundaries, well defined by an XML file that lives in the SPDX project. We're being very precise about what we are approving and what we are not approving. And then that we can then rely on that precise set of symbols to represent what licenses apply to particular binary RPMs.
Yes, thank you. And I will add to that as a package maintainer myself, I have found that this clarification part that's in the legal Fedora legal documentation now is probably the most confusing to longtime Fedora package maintainers. And I remind them, I say, no, it simplifies your work. Like you're just listing everything here. You don't have to do, like you were talking about, the algebraic reduction. You don't have to do anything like that. So once they kind of understand that, they realize that this system is easier and more well-defined with those clarifications. And Jelaine, I'll let you take the last one here.
Yeah, so I mean, it's been going pretty well. It'll be a year at the end of July since this change came into effect. And, I think the biggest sort of challenge and the ongoing work, as we've already touched upon, is just, updating the existing packages efficiently. I saw that just put a question in the Q&A, which I kind of answered, but I'll let Richard and David give their weigh in on that one at the end. So to that end, we just had a hack fest for the kind of focusing on the EPL packages a couple weeks ago. I think that was helpful. We're, considering maybe doing another one if that's helpful for people. We have some office hours on the schedule. We'll try to market those a little better if we've communicated them to just sort of help package maintainers with questions and, have sort of live availability, as well as, of course, you can put issues in the GitLab issue list and email on Fedora license. We also are hoping, or we have a goal, there's some license review work that happens within Red Hat, and it's really overlapping the Fedora sort of allowed, not allowed list. So the goal is to sort of incorporate that in as well. And then I think further improvements to the documentation. Richard, I've tried to update things as we've gone along and as things evolve. And so, always open to that and suggestions. And, as I said, I think there's a lot of influence in this on the SPX license list and that community, and that will probably continue as well. And I kind of hope to see there'll be an impact from this on other communities. I mean, from what I know, in terms of SPX ID adoption in open source projects, the kernel has adopted using SPX IDs in the source files, which some of you may be aware of. And so the SPX community was really involved in that, and actually Richard and I also were involved in that as well. It's been going on for some years. But I'm aware of other distros that kind of tried to adopt SPX IDs, but didn't really engage in the SPX community. Like in some cases, like even with my involvement, I wasn't even aware of what they were doing. And not to say that, like it's an open standard, anyone can use it. But I think it's a much more successful adoption when the communities work together, right? I mean, for obvious reasons. And yes, U-Boot was actually the first project to use SPX IDs. If you don't really like the SPX license identifier tag that's been sort of solidified in the spec, that kind of actually came from U-Boot, and we as a community didn't want to like upset the apple cart in terms of the history of that, because they kind of took initiative. We knew there was a possibility people would do that, but they kind of went for it, and there's been a lot of momentum since then. I think that was around 2012, maybe. It was pretty early. So yeah, I think there's some good impacts. I think the documentation that we have is something that could be borrowed, by other communities as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, and maybe we get the word out more.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so I can read the Q&A on the side there. Okay. Ooh. Yeah, so are there any questions specific to?
There was one in the Q&A that I gave an answer to, but I think that you guys should answer as well. So the question was, if you could tell every packager in Fedora one thing about this initiative, what would you tell them and why?
Well, wow. I don't think I can pick just one.
I'll try like one, but I haven't thought about this question before. But I think, I think my views on SPDX are probably more complicated than Jelane's, or maybe David's. But SPDX is, now I think a useful tool for achieving what has always been Fedora's goal, which is to have, I think pretty much always, which is to have, as practically as possible, a complete FOSS, free and open source software Linux distribution. And, that you can't just sort of will that into existence. You have to be very careful about what's in the packages you are including. And SPDX is a tool for helping you review and classify the licenses that you find to make sure that they meet your standards. And I think that is what I would say is the maybe the most important aspect of it for me.
Yeah, I think so. I guess for me, the thing that's been, probably most surprising is sort of how lacking our existing data was in spec files, and that this opportunity now, that this effort is giving us a way to ensure that the licensing information advertised by an RPM is actually correct. And I know I've already said it, but that's really important to me as someone who writes software. Is I don't want people to just assume, it's open source. I mean, who cares what the license is? Well, I put some thought into picking the licenses that I have on my software, and I want to make sure that that's understood. So we're kind of able with this effort to do that, and revisit things in Fedora and make sure that we're accurately representing that, and then feeding those back to SPDX upstream if they don't have that captured already.
Yeah, I think I hear some what I would call grumbling about the complexity of the resulting license expressions, despite the fact that under the previous system we had some very complex license expressions for package maintainers that were trying to adhere to the way that the previous policy was articulated. And I would say the complexity reflects the underlying actual complexity. So for better or worse, a lot of these packages are, from a licensing standpoint, quite complex. They are the result, especially relatively old code bases. They are the result of contributions, some cases going back decades. You would expect there to be a rich history of licensing reflected in the code. And so it is just a part of what these projects and packages are, that the complexity is sort of what it is. You can't sort of will it out of existence. It's, I think, better to be transparent about it. And again, as I was saying before, it's only by knowing what licenses are in the code that you can apply your policies about, making sure that the package is free and open source and doesn't have any non-FOSS licenses.
Right. I do see a question over here. As package maintainers, do we have tools that we can programmatically check which licenses exist? Yeah, there's a number of tools actually, and they're listed on the docs.fedoraproject.org site under the Fedora Legal Resources section. There's license check, I think is the name of it. Scan code toolkit, which is kind of a heavy-handed one. And then there's Fossology, which is available in a hosted form, as well as something that you can run locally. There's an instance, if you go to fossology.org, you can use their test instance, which they refresh daily. And it's kind of neat because you can upload a source RPM, and then it'll run through and produce this sort of tree of all the data, and you can click through it and you can see what it thinks licenses are. Emphasis on what it thinks, because again, these tools are they're good, but they're not 100% perfect. But yeah, check out the docs site, because we list those tools there.
I put the link in the Q&A as a reply to the.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, this process of identifying licenses just can't be fully automated. It's just the nature of what this stuff is not subject, or susceptible rather, to true complete automation. You can only get part of the way with any of these tools.
Oh yeah, remember I ran into the problem with code that I had written at Red Hat that was GPL2 code, and I was using the old Red Hat suggested boilerplate header that had the extra text at the end that caused the license checkers to view it as a proprietary license, because it had a thing in there about Red Hat trademarks. But if you were just looking at the code and you would read it, it was the GPL boilerplate. It just had that extra sentence at the bottom, which made it totally different for the license checker there.
As an aside, bad license notice. Red Hat hasn't used it in years. We should never have done so. Yeah.
Are there any plans for having RPM lent in RHEL recognize SPDX identifiers? My understanding is RPM lent has that now, that capability now in Fedora. We don't use RPM lent in RHEL. We have RPM inspect, and prior to that we had RPM diff. Those tools RPM inspect recognizes SPDX identifiers. One thing we'd like to do at some point, and we're not quite there yet, is have those tools mark the legacy Fedora identifiers as deprecated, but we just have far too many things still needing conversion before we can really turn that on. So any new packages should be using SPDX.
Yeah, thanks. Pretty much right to the end of the session. Thanks, all three of you, for this presentation. I'm really excited about this one. I wrote it in the chat too, just because you see the long tail of how all this data has been stewarded and getting to see it go into this common upstream. It's just really cool to me as a Fedora user and contributor to see how Fedora contributes even in this legal space where we don't often see as many examples of that as maybe we'd like to. So big appreciation for that work, and thanks for coming out to the release party to share all what's good with the licensing expressions and RPM.
Absolutely.
It's always nice to see, my favorite lawyers at a party.
I'm not sure if that's facetious or not, but I'll take it as a compliment. And I answered the other question about the missing. Someone busted me on. I always try to use my photos in slides sometimes because I don't have to worry about the licensing. But I forgot to put the CC by SA 4.0 notice, so I have fixed the slide now for those concerned about the dog picture. So you're welcome to use it.
And is that available under CC by license as well?
Yes. And yeah. Yep, exactly. Well, thanks so much, you guys.